It was a cool October evening in 1992 when 7-year-old Nikki Allan stepped outside to play. She was a bright, cheerful child, the kind of little girl who could light up a room with her smile. She lived with her mother, stepfather, and sisters in a block of council flats called Ware Garth, in the East End of Sunderland, England. That evening, she had been visiting her grandfather, who lived in the same building. Nobody could have imagined that the short walk home would be the last journey she ever made. When her mother, Sharon Henderson, arrived home that night and found no sign of Nikki, panic set in almost immediately. Neighbors poured out of their homes to help search. More than 100 people combed the area, calling her name into the darkness. But Nikki was gone. What nobody knew yet was that somewhere out there, a man had already sealed her fate, and it would take more than 30 years before justice finally caught up with him. As the hours ticked by with no sign of Nikki, investigators began piecing together what little they had. Then came a chilling breakthrough. Grainy CCTV footage emerged, showing Nikki walking alongside a man, moving away from her home. She was not being dragged, she was not struggling. She appeared to be going willingly. A witness came forward to confirm what the footage suggested. She had seen Nikki that evening, walking with an unknown man. The detail she added made the image even more haunting. The little girl had been skipping to keep up with him. Skipping, as if she trusted him completely. As if wherever they were going was perfectly fine. That trust, it would later emerge, had been carefully manufactured. The following morning, 2 volunteers who had joined the overnight search made a discovery that would horrify the entire nation. Outside the derelict old Exchange building, a crumbling, abandoned industrial structure on High Street East, they spotted Nikki's shoes and coat. And inside, in the cold darkness of the basement, they found her body. She had been forced through a gap in a boarded-up window. Inside that pitch-black building, far from anyone who could help her, Nikki had been struck in the head with a brick hard enough to fracture her skull. She had then been stabbed 37 times through her chest, heart, and lungs. A post-mortem examination revealed she had likely been knocked unconscious by the blow to her head before the stabbing began. A witness living nearby later recalled hearing a loud scream at around 10 o'clock that night, a scream that would help investigators pinpoint the moment her life ended. She was 7 years old. The murder sent shockwaves through Sunderland. The pressure on police to find the killer was enormous, not just from the public, but from within the force itself. And so when suspicion began to fall on a young man named George Heron, investigators moved quickly. Heron was 24 years old and had recently moved into the same block of flats as Nikki with his sister. People who knew him described him as a loner. He had been seen buying cheese and onion crisps on the day of the murder, the same flavor that was Nikki's favorite, and police theorized he may have used them to lure her away. His sister told officers that when he came home that night, he had gone straight to the bathroom and stayed there for a long time, behavior she described as unusual for him. Blood traces were reportedly found on his clothing and shoes, and a knife consistent with the stab wounds was found at his home. Heron was brought in and questioned over the course of 3 days. He denied the murder 120 times, and then on the 121st, he said he had done it. Police believed they had their man. The case went to trial at Leeds Crown Court in 1993, but it never reached a verdict. The judge presiding over the case ruled that the police questioning had been oppressive and heavy-handed, making Heron's taped confession inadmissible. With the confession thrown out, the case collapsed. George Heron was found not guilty and walked free. The fallout was devastating, not just for Nikki's family, who were now told police were not looking for anyone else, but for Heron himself. He was given a new identity and relocated out of Sunderland, but the cloud of suspicion never fully lifted. In 1996, a newspaper tracked him down living under a false name in the south of England. He spoke about what the experience had done to him, how he had begun to doubt his own memory, how the hatred directed at him had pushed him to thoughts of ending his life. Years later, after the real killer was finally unmasked, Heron reflected that the whole ordeal had cost him his reputation, his stability, and his ability to trust anyone. He said Nikki's murder had destroyed many lives, and that he was one of them. Nikki's mother, Sharon, was not spared either. In the aftermath of the failed trial, she found herself being blamed. Local anger, which should have been directed at the killer, was instead pointed at her. People called her a bad mother. She was left feeling isolated and unheard, forced to begin a decades-long fight for justice entirely on her own terms. The case went cold. Years passed. Nikki's case became one of those painful, unresolved chapters that communities try to move past but never quite can. The killer, whoever he was, had melted back into ordinary life. Then, in February 2014, a new name entered the picture. Stephen Grieveson, a convicted serial killer already serving time in prison, was arrested on suspicion of Nikki's murder. It seemed like a promising lead. But after questioning, officers concluded there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. He was released from that inquiry with no charges, and the case fell quiet again. In May 2016, something unexpected happened. A woman reached out to Sharon Henderson with what she said was new information. This woman had been 12 years old at the time of the murder and had been babysitting in the area on the night Nikki disappeared. She shared what she knew with the police. It was a small ripple, but it would eventually become a wave. Sharon refused to give up. In September 2016, she launched an online petition calling for a full reinvestigation of her daughter's case. Within 24 hours, it had gathered more than 500 signatures. She wrote to serial killer Grieveson directly, asking if he knew anything about what had happened to Nikki. She met with senior police officers, pushing them to start again from scratch. Her persistence paid off. In April 2017, a new dedicated task force was established. This time armed with something the original investigators had never had: modern forensic technology. The new investigative team made a bold decision. They would collect DNA samples from every man who had lived in the Sunderland area at the time of the murder. Over the course of the reinvestigation, they gathered samples from more than 800 men, took over 1,200 witness statements, and produced 2,500 documents. It was a monumental undertaking, later described by the judge as a Herculean effort. One by one, men were eliminated. And then, on October 4, 2017, a DNA sample was collected from a man named David Boyd. It was a match. Boyd's DNA was found on multiple locations on Nikki's clothing, including on her cycling shorts and under the arms of her t-shirt. The biological evidence tied him directly to the little girl who had been murdered 25 years earlier. In April 2018, police raided a property in the Stockton area of Teesside and arrested him. But who exactly was David Boyd, and why had he never appeared on anyone's radar before? At the time of the murder, David Boyd had been 25 years old and living in the same block of flats as Nikki, 3 floors above her family's home. Crucially, he lived on the same floor as Nikki's grandparents, meaning the two would have known each other. He knew the layout of the old exchange building intimately. In fact, investigators learned that just days before the murder, he had taken a young boy into the same building through the very same boarded-up window, searching for pigeons. And there was one more detail that made everything suddenly, sickeningly clear. Boyd's girlfriend at the time was a woman named Caroline Branton, who occasionally babysat for Nikki. That was why the little girl had been skipping alongside him that night. That was why she had gone so willingly. He was not a stranger to her. He was someone she associated with safety, with familiarity. And he had used that trust to walk her to her death. Boyd's history made his guilt even more chilling in hindsight. As far back as 1986, he had been convicted of approaching a group of children in a park, grabbing a 10-year-old girl and attempting to kiss her. That same year, he had exposed himself to a woman and later admitted to a psychiatrist that he had been doing it since he was 16 and felt unable to control the urge. In 1997, he confessed to police that he had exposed himself to 3 teenage girls, though no charges followed. In 1999, he indecently assaulted a 9-year-old girl in a park. By the time of his arrest for Nikki's murder, he had accumulated 22 convictions for 45 separate offenses. He had also told a probation officer that he harbored sexual fantasies involving young children. All of this had been happening in plain sight for decades. Boyd was formally charged with Nikki's murder in 2022. His trial began at Newcastle Crown Court on the 20th of April 2023, more than 30 years after Nikki's death. In court, the prosecution laid out its case methodically. They argued that Boyd had lured Nikki toward wasteland near the River Wear with the intention of committing a sexual offense. When she resisted and screamed, the prosecution said he struck her in the face to silence her, then pushed her through the gap in the boarded-up window of the old Exchange building. Inside, in the pitch-black darkness, Nikki had tried to run. Her body was found in a different room from where she had first been attacked. Evidence, the court was told, that she had attempted to flee before he caught her. The judge, Mrs. Justice Lambert, later described to Boyd what those final moments must have been like for a 7-year-old child. The darkness, the confusion, the terror of seeing someone lurching toward her with a brick. She said Nikki's fear in those moments was beyond imagination. Boyd's defense team argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial. They pointed out that there was no direct evidence placing him at the scene, and no clear proof of a sexual motive for the crime. As for the DNA, Boyd had a ready explanation. He claimed he had spat off his balcony that evening, and that the saliva had landed on Nikki below, which was later transferred to her clothing when she touched it. The prosecution dismantled this claim in front of the jury. They argued that saliva from a balcony landing on a child below could not possibly account for Boyd's DNA being found under the arms of Nikki's t-shirt and on her cycling shorts. The only explanation that made sense, they said, was that he had physically handled her, forcing her through the window. Boyd chose not to take the stand in his own defense. On the 12th of May 2023, after 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury of 10 women and 2 men returned a verdict, guilty of murder. In the public gallery, Nikki's family wept. David Boyd was sentenced to life in prison on the 23rd of May 2023, with a minimum term of 29 years before he could be considered for parole. Under the sentencing rules that applied in 1992, the judge said her hands were tied. If the current rules had applied, she would have imposed a minimum of 37 years instead. Boyd will not be eligible to apply for parole until August 2049. Sharon Henderson, who had spent 30 years fighting for this moment, stood outside the court and said she was devastated. She had expected the word life to mean life. She felt let down, again. She called the sentence a disgrace. In a victim impact statement read to the court, she described Nikki as a bright, sparky child with a beautiful smile, who had always been a mammy's girl. She described how the murder had torn through her life, how she had been accused of being a bad mother, how the stress had eroded her mental and physical health to the point of hospitalization, how at times she had lashed out in desperation and even faced arrest herself. Through all of it, she said, she had never stopped fighting. Nikki's father, David Allan, said that he lived near the building where his daughter was murdered and that it was a constant reminder he could not escape. He said he thought about Nikki lying alone in the cold that night, the same building he had driven past countless times during the search, not knowing she was already inside. The detective who led the reinvestigation, Detective Chief Superintendent Lisa Thieker, called it a huge day for Nikki's family and praised their incredible strength. In the months that followed, Northumbria police formally apologized to George Heron, the innocent man they had put through a nightmare 3 decades earlier, and also to Nikki's family, though Sharon Henderson rejected the apology as hollow. She called for a full public inquiry into the force's handling of the original investigation. Boyd's attempt to appeal both his conviction and his sentence was rejected in October 2024. Nikki Allan was 7 years old. She was a child who skipped alongside the man who would kill her because she had no reason to fear him. She screamed when she realized what was happening, and that scream cost her her life. For 31 years, her killer walked free, raising families, living in houses, watching the world go on, while Nikki's family was frozen in grief and rage and unanswered questions. It was DNA science that finally unraveled him. It was the stubbornness of a mother who refused to be silenced that kept the case alive long enough for that science to be used. And it was a jury of 12 ordinary people who, after listening to everything, needed just 2.5 hours to conclude what anyone paying attention already suspected. David Boyd murdered Nikki Allan. He knew her, she trusted him, and he used that trust to destroy her. Justice arrived. It arrived 30 years late, and for Nikki's family, the pain of that delay may never fully heal, but it arrived. If you liked this video, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Cases like Nikki's deserve to be remembered, and stories like hers remind us why we must never stop asking questions.